I'm heartbroken, I'm devastated, the loss of my daughter and what she had to go through. Feeling scared and alone.
There's a specific sound a sister makes when she's holding her sibling in their final moments. It's not quite crying. The body hasn't caught up to what the mind already knows.
I was scared, I was scared myself because I hate to have to see her like that, and it was all on my hands. I didn't want to wipe it off because it's I still felt her presence, and I still felt that she was with me.
Jaleeyah Tune heard that sound coming from her own throat on December 21st, 2025, for days before Christmas, with her 13-year-old sister Jaleeyah's blood still warm on her hands. She didn't want to wipe it off, because as long as it stayed there, Jaleeyah was still present, still with her. The mind does strange things when it's trying to protect you from reality. But here's what makes this case impossible to process. 3 teenagers jumped out of bushes in broad daylight at 4:30 in the afternoon in a residential area where families are preparing for Christmas and executed a planned ambush on a 13-year-old girl. And one of those suspects' fathers would later say he saw it coming, that he knew, that he tried to stop it, and that he blames the boy's mother for what happened next. How do we make sense of that? How do ordinary teenage boys become capable of planning an execution? And at what point does a parent's inability to control their child become something more than just bad parenting? Something that maybe should carry legal consequences? If you ever felt helpless watching someone you love make choices that will destroy them, if you ever wonder where the line is between a parent's responsibility and a teenager's agency, you're in the right place. This case will force you to answer questions you've probably never wanted to think about. Subscribe, because this story doesn't end where you think it does. And it will stay with you long after Christmas lights come down. We need to start with who Jaleeyah was before December 21st, because the way her family describes her matters. She wasn't just a 13-year-old victim. She was their Christmas miracle. Born 3 months premature in August, weighing just 2 pounds 5 ounces, Jaleeyah spent her first months fighting to survive in a hospital. She didn't come home until Christmas Eve 2012. For her family, Christmas wasn't just about presents and traditions. It was about the day they finally got to bring their miracle baby home. Every Christmas after that carried that meaning. Every year was a celebration of the life they almost lost. Jaleeyah's mother, Whitney Tune, raised 4 children, and by all accounts, Jaleeyah was the bubbly one, the personality, the 7th grader who loved making TikToks, dancing, eating out with friends, and just being around people. Her family and friends said she had this way of making everyone laugh without even trying. She wasn't trying to be funny. It was just who she was. She was a cheerleader at Wayne Academy. She had dreams. She had a journal she'd been writing in, something that would haunt her father later when he realized she'd been preparing them somehow, though nobody understood for what. She had Christmas presents waiting under the tree, unopened gifts that would stay wrapped forever. And here's the detail that makes this feel impossible. Jaleeyah and her 14-year-old sister Jaleeyah were just walking home after getting food. That's it. Something they'd done dozens of times before. Something so routine it didn't require a second thought. A normal Sunday afternoon errand in their neighborhood near the Alpha Arms apartments on Alpha Court in Goldsboro, North Carolina. But someone had been waiting. 3 teenage boys hidden in the bushes with a plan. Now let's talk about teenage boys and violence, because this is where the story stops making sense to most people. We understand rage. We understand impulse. We understand a fight that escalates too far. But a planned ambush? 3 boys coordinating, waiting in bushes with intent? That requires something different. That requires crossing a psychological line most people never approach. Think about what is to happen in a teenage mind to move from anger to planning to execution. There's a moment where the idea forms, probably in conversation, probably feeding off each other's energy. There's the moment where someone suggests a weapon. There's the moment where someone agrees. There's the moment where they pick a location. There's the moment where they hide and wait. Each of those moments is an off-ramp. Each one is a chance to say, "This is insane. We're not actually doing this." But they didn't take any of those exits. They stayed the course. Which means by the time Jaleeyah and Jaleeyah walked past those bushes at 4:30 p.m. on December 21st, 3 boys had already made every choice that mattered. Jaleeyah described what happened next in a way that breaks you. She was walking with her sister and their friends. They'd just gotten food. Normal teenage afternoon. Then suddenly, boys she didn't know jumped out of the bushes and started shooting. Just like that. No warning. No confrontation. No argument that escalated. Just gunfire. Jaleeyah's brain tried to process what was happening. She spun around, looking for her sister. And that's when she saw Jaleeyah had been shot. The look on her sister's face. Jaleeyah said she looked so scared. And Jaleeyah held her, right there on Alpha Court, in broad daylight. For days before Christmas, a 14-year-old girl held her 13-year-old sister as she died. The blood got all over Jaleeyah's hands. And she didn't want to wipe it off, because as long as it was there, it felt like Jaleeyah was still present, still with her. That's what trauma does. It creates these small rituals, these ways of holding on to someone even as they slip away. A community advocate named Lee Artis was on the scene that night. He knew Jaleeyah, knew her as a bubbly young lady, always smiling. He saw her body under the sheet. He consoled the family. And he told police something crucial. He'd seen two people walking behind the apartment building, acting suspiciously. This detail mattered because police were already working a theory. And when they arrested 3 teenage boys the next day, 2 16-year-olds and 1 15-year-old, they didn't just charge them with murder. They charged them with felony conspiracy. Under North Carolina law, that charge means one thing. Police believe this was planned, premeditated, not a crime of passion or an argument gone wrong. This was an execution that 3 teenage boys coordinated in advance. Which brings us back to the question nobody wants to ask. Why? What could a 13-year-old girl possibly have done to inspire 3 teenage boys to plan her murder? The investigators haven't revealed the motive. Not publicly. Not yet. But the fact that conspiracy charges were filed tells us they have evidence. Text messages, maybe. Witness statements. Some kind of proof that these boys discussed this before it happened. That they planned it. That they knew what they were going to do. And that raises even more disturbing questions. Because if this was planned, that means Jaleeyah was targeted. Not a random victim. Not wrong place, wrong time. She was specifically chosen. These boys wanted her dead. A 13-year-old cheerleader who loved making TikToks. What universe makes sense of that? Now, we need to talk about the suspects because 2 of them have been identified in court documents as Gear Smith and Josh Jordan, both 16 years old. The 3rd suspect, the 15-year-old, hasn't been named because of his age. And this is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. Because a few days after the arrests, a man came forward claiming to be the father of one of the suspects. And instead of defending his son, instead of claiming innocence or asking for privacy, he did something shocking. He blamed the boy's mother. He went on a long video rant, posted publicly, where he said his son's arrest was no surprise to him, that he'd seen this coming, that he'd tried to save his son from this exact outcome, and that the boy's mother should be charged with conspiracy herself because she enabled everything that led to this moment. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. This man, who we'll call the father, though his relationship to the suspect hasn't been officially verified by authorities, recorded a raw, emotional video where he laid out a specific narrative. According to him, his son had been living with the boy's mother in Goldsboro, North Carolina, getting into trouble, not going to school, hanging with gangs, carrying weapons. The mother, according to the father, knew all of this and did nothing, let him run wild in the streets. So the father stepped in. He went to Goldsboro, got his son, and brought him to live with him. Appears to be in a different state based on the video. And according to the father, for 3 months, things were good. The boy went to school, took an auto mechanics class during summer school, started turning his life around. The father said he was teaching him about business, trying to give him structure, trying to show him a different path than the streets. But then the son ran away, went back to his mother in Goldsboro, and the father claims the mother helped him do it, that she came and picked him up on a sneak tip, that instead of sending him back to his father's house where he was doing well, she let him stay with her. And the father said he knew what would happen. He told his son directly, if you go back to Goldsboro with that mentality, you're going to mess your life up I'm trying to save you because I've been there. I've done that. I see what you're on. I see where you're headed. But the son went back anyway. And now, according to the father, his son is sitting in a jail cell facing murder charges, probably thinking, all I had to do was stay with my dad. Now, let's be very careful here. This is one man's perspective, one side of a story. The mother hasn't spoken publicly. She hasn't defended herself against these accusations. We don't know her version of events. We don't know why she might have picked up her son, or what circumstances led to that decision. We don't know what kind of custody arrangement existed, or whether she had legal grounds to bring her son back. We don't know if the father's version of events is accurate, exaggerated, or missing crucial context. What we do know is this. A 16-year-old boy is now charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy in the death of a 13-year-old girl, and his alleged father believes this was preventable. That's the claim, that if the mother had made different choices, Jaleeyah Tune would still be alive. The father in the video is clearly devastated, angry, frustrated. He talks about how he had to find out about his son's arrest through his own investigation, because nobody on the mother's side of the family told him. He says his wife helped him search for information, found the court paperwork, and that's how he learned his son was charged with conspiracy and murder. He says the mother blocked him on social media, so he couldn't even reach out to her directly, and he makes a specific claim that stands out. He says the mother only sent the son to live with him in the first place because she was about to face legal consequences herself. According to father, the son wasn't going to school, and the mother was being threatened with arrest and eviction because of the boy's behavior, and because he allegedly broke into her apartment. So sending him to live with his father wasn't about what was best for the boy. It was about saving herself from legal trouble. And once those cases against her were dismissed and she moved to a new place, she allegedly started plotting to get the son back. Again, we can't verify any of this. But if even part of it is true, it paints a picture of a teenage boy caught between two parents with very different ideas about how to handle him. A father trying to impose structure and discipline. A mother who, according to the father, enabled destructive behavior because it was easier than confrontation. And a boy who ultimately chose a path that felt like freedom, even though it led straight to a murder charge. This is where the case becomes about more than just what happened on December 21st. It becomes about what happens when parents lose control of their children. About what society expects from mothers and fathers when their teenagers are making dangerous choices. About whether loving your child means letting them make their own mistakes or forcing them into boundaries they'll resist. Let's talk about blame, because that's what the father's video is really about. He's assigning blame. And he's not just blaming his son. He's blaming the boy's mother so publicly and so forcefully that he's calling for her to be charged with conspiracy. Not in a criminal sense necessarily, but in a moral sense. He's saying she's just as responsible for Jaleeyah's death as the three boys who pulled triggers. That's a massive claim. And it raises questions that don't have easy answers. When is a parent responsible for their child's crimes? At what point does failing to control a teenager become criminal negligence? If a mother knows her son is carrying a weapon and hanging with gangs, and she doesn't report it, does that make her complicit in what happens next? These aren't hypothetical questions. These are the questions this case forces us to confront. There's a comment on social media that captures one perspective. As a mother, if my son isn't doing right in the household with me and I know his daddy can gain control over him, to his daddy he will go. There shouldn't have to be court documents in order for a child to live in a household with a parent who can give proper structure. That comment is sympathetic to the father's position. It suggests that the mother should have recognized she couldn't handle her son and voluntarily sent him back to his father. But another comment offers a counter perspective. It takes two to make them, and it takes two to raise them. When you divide a household, the children become vulnerable to all kinds of things. Let's think about how our children are affected by our choices. That comment points to a deeper truth. Family dysfunction creates vulnerability. Kids caught between parents, bouncing between households, often end up falling through cracks. Nobody has full picture. Nobody has complete control. And the kid suffers. But here's what complicates all of this. The father admits he had to rough up his son to get him to comply. Those are his words. He says the only time he spent with his son was trying to get him to understand life and roughing his ass up because he still had that mentality. Now, we don't know what rough up means in this context. Could be verbal discipline, could be physical, could be something in between. But it suggests the father's approach wasn't just structure and boundaries. It involved force. And the son ran away, which means whatever the father was doing, it wasn't working either. The son didn't want to be there. He chose to leave. He chose to go back to his mother, back to Goldsboro, back to the streets. Maybe because he genuinely preferred that life. Or maybe because the alternative, living with a father who admits to roughing him up, felt worse. We don't know. We can't know. But it's important to acknowledge that this wasn't a simple story of good parent versus bad parent. Both parents were struggling with a teenager who was out of control. And both parents, in their own ways, failed to prevent what happened on December 21st. Now, let's go back to Jaleeyah's family. Because while all this drama about the suspect's parents is playing out, there's a mother who will never see her daughter again. Whitney Tune, Jaleeyah's mother, spoke to the media in the days after murder. Her words are simple and devastating. She was a good kid. She didn't deserve this. Whitney described Jaleeyah as mature, friendly, smart, bubbly, someone with a personality that's impossible to replace. She talked about how Jaleeyah was born 3 months early, came home right before Christmas 2012, and now she's leaving right before Christmas 2025. The symmetry of it is unbearable. The Christmas miracle who became a Christmas tragedy. Whitney said she's planning her daughter's funeral during the week. She should be planning Christmas celebrations. She's standing behind crime scene tape, watching police investigate her daughter's death, knowing her other daughter, only 14 years old, held Jaleeyah in her final moments. Let's sit with that for a second. Jaleeyah, the 14-year-old sister, is now carrying trauma that will shape the rest of her life. She held her sister as she died. She has her sister's blood literally on her hands, and she's going to remember that forever. Christmas will never be the same for her. Walking through her neighborhood will never be the same. Hearing sudden noises will never be the same. Her entire adolescence and adulthood will be filtered through this one moment where 3 boys jumped out of bushes and took her sister away. There's a comment on social media that captures this reality. Her big sister is going to be forever changed. All for what? A child is gone, and a mother will never be the same. She will remember this for her entire life. This poor family. Christmas will forever be a sad memory. And that's true, but it's also incomplete. Because Christmas wasn't just going to be sad for Jaleeyah's family. It's sad for the suspects' families too. 3 teenage boys, now facing first-degree murder charges. At 15 and 16 years old. Under North Carolina law, 16-year-olds charged with murder are automatically tried as adults, which means these boys are likely facing life sentences. Their childhoods ended on December 21st just as surely as Jaleeyah's did. Their families are also destroyed. Their futures are gone. And while we can argue they deserve that, they made choices, they planned this, they pulled triggers. We also have to acknowledge the waste of it all. For young lives ended or destroyed. Multiple families shattered. All because 3 teenage boys decided a 13-year-old girl needed to die. The investigation revealed details that make this even more disturbing. Police believe this was a planned attack. The conspiracy charges prove that, which means at some point before December 21st, these boys talk about killing Jaleeyah. They discussed it. They agreed to it. They made a plan. They'd pick a location. Those bushes near the apartment complex. They brought weapons. And then they waited. That level of premeditation is chilling because it removes any possibility of this being a tragic accident or a confrontation that escalated. This was cold. This was calculated. And we still don't know why. What motive could possibly justify planning the murder of a 13-year-old girl? Some people online have speculated it might be gang-related. The father's video mentioned gangs. He said his son was hanging with gang members in Goldsboro. Maybe Jaleeyah was connected to a rival gang. Maybe this was retaliation for something. But Jaleeyah's family describes her as a normal 7th grader who loved TikTok and cheerleading. That doesn't sound like someone involved in gang activity. Other people have speculated it might be personal. Maybe a dispute over a boy or social media drama, or some teenage conflict that escalated beyond reason. But again, planning an execution over teenage drama seems insane. And yet, teenage brains don't work like adult brains. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and understanding consequences, isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. Teenagers genuinely don't process risk and consequences the way adults do. They're more susceptible to peer pressure, more likely to act on emotion, more likely to think they're invincible and won't get caught. So maybe to these three boys, murdering Jaleeyah didn't seem like a life-destroying decision. Maybe it seemed justified in the moment. Maybe they convinced themselves it was necessary. Maybe they thought they'd get away with it. They didn't. Police arrested all three suspects within 24 hours, which means either they were sloppy or someone talked. Maybe witnesses identified them. Maybe security cameras caught them. Maybe one of the boys confessed or turned on the others. We don't know the details of how investigators connected them to the crimes so quickly, but the speed of the arrest suggests the evidence was strong. And the fact that all three were charged with both murder and conspiracy suggests prosecutors believe they can prove this was planned. That's not an easy charge to make. Conspiracy requires evidence of an agreement to commit a crime. Text messages, recorded conversations, witness testimony that the boys discussed this in advance. Something concrete that shows intent. The fact that prosecutors filed those charges means they have it. Now, let's talk about the community response, because this murder didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in Goldsboro, North Carolina, a city that, like many American cities, has been grappling with youth violence. According to police, Jaleeyah was the second homicide victim under the age of 18 in 2025. 2 children murdered in 1 year in a single city. That's too many. And community leaders are responding. A mentor named Mark Colebrook spoke to the media and said it takes a village to raise and protect young people. Another community advocate, Lee Artis, said he wants to start mentor programs for teens and a big brother/big sister program. These are people recognizing that teen violence is a systemic issue that requires systemic solutions. It's not enough to arrest kids after they commit murders. We have to intervene before they get to that point. We have to create pathways for at-risk youth that don't lead to jail or death. We have to teach conflict resolution and emotional regulation and the value of human life. Because somewhere in Goldsboro right now, there are other teenage boys heading down the same path these 3 suspects were on. And unless something changes, they'll end up in the same place. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Intervention is hard. Prevention is hard. Especially when you're dealing with teenagers who don't want to be helped. The father in the video claims he tried to intervene with his son, brought him to live with him, put him in school, taught him a trade, and the son ran away. You can't force a 16-year-old to accept help if they're determined to self-destruct. You can't lock them in their room until they turn 21. So what do? What's the solution when a teenager is making dangerous choices and won't listen to reason? Some people say tougher love, more discipline, military school or boot camps or scared straight programs. Other people say those approaches don't work, that they traumatize kids without addressing underlying issues. They say what troubled teens need is therapy, trauma-informed care, understanding of root causes. Both perspectives have merit, and both perspectives have limitations. Because sometimes structure and discipline are what a kid needs. And sometimes understanding and therapy are what a kid needs. And sometimes nothing works because the kid has decided they don't want help. The father's video reveals his desperation. He knew his son was heading toward disaster. He tried to stop it, and he failed. That's a specific kind of grief. The grief of seeing something terrible coming and being powerless to prevent it. He said he had vibes that his son was involved when he first heard about a 13-year-old being murdered. He started asking around, trying to find out the suspects' names. When he heard Josh or Jaw, he immediately thought of his son, nicknamed Jaw, full name Gear. And then his wife confirmed it, found the court paperwork, and the father's worst fear was realized. His son had done exactly what he predicted, had thrown his life away exactly the way the father had warned him he would. And now that son is sitting in a jail cell, probably realizing too late that his father was right. All he had to do was stay. All he had to do was accept the structure his father was trying to provide. All he had to do was choose a different path. But he didn't. And now a 13-year-old girl is dead, and he's facing life in prison. Here's what haunts me about this case. Nobody wanted this outcome. Not Jaleeyah's family. Not the suspects' families. Not the community. Even the suspects themselves probably didn't fully understand the consequences of what they were planning. In their teenage brains, maybe they thought this would solve some problem. Maybe they thought it would earn them respect or status. Maybe they thought Jaleeyah deserved it for some perceived slight. Whatever they thought, they were wrong. And now everyone loses. Jaleeyah loses her life. Her family loses a daughter and sister. Jashia loses her innocence and sense of safety. The suspects lose their futures. Their families lose their sons. The community loses faith in the safety of their neighborhoods. And all of it was preventable. At dozens of points along the way, different choices could have changed this outcome. What if the suspects' parents had been able to keep them away from gang influence? What if the school system had intervened when they stopped showing up to class? What if someone had reported the weapons? What if mental health services had been available? What if the boys had friends who talked them out of this plan? What if community programs had given them better options? What if? But none of those things happened. And so 3 boys hid in bushes on December 21st, 2025, and murdered a 13-year-old girl in broad daylight. And now we're left picking up the pieces and try and make sense of senselessness. There was a balloon released for Jaleeyah a few days after her death. Her father spoke, and his words were raw and full of love. He thanked everyone for showing up. He talked about how much Jaleeyah loved all of them. He mentioned that he'd just gotten out of prison, timing that's both fortunate and tragic. Fortunate because he got to spend Jaleeyah's last days with her. Tragic because he missed so much of her life, and now will miss all the rest of it. He talked about how Jaleeyah had been writing in a journal, preparing them somehow, though nobody understood for what. That detail is eerie. Did Jaleeyah sense something was coming? Did she have intuition that her life was in danger? Or is that just the way grief works? Looking back at normal things and assigning them prophetic meaning, we'll never know. But her father clearly finds some comfort in the idea that his daughter was preparing them for this loss. That maybe she knew, somehow, that they'd need that preparation. The balloon release was illegal. The father joked they were breaking the law for Jaleeyah, that nothing ever stopped his baby. It's a small act of defiance in the face of unbearable loss. A way of saying, you can take our daughter, but you can't take our love for her. You can't take our memories. You can't take the fact that she existed and mattered and changed our lives. They released balloons and said, Merry Christmas on 3. Try to honor the Christmas miracle one more time. Even though this Christmas will never feel like a miracle again. And that's where we are. A 13-year-old girl is dead. 3 teenage boys are charged with her murder. One suspect's father is publicly blaming the boy's mother and calling for her to face consequences. The victim's family is planning a funeral instead of opening Christmas presents. A 14-year-old girl is traumatized beyond measure. A community is searching for answers and solutions. And all of us are left wondering how 3 teenage boys decided that murdering a child was something they needed to do. The legal process will unfold over months or years. The suspects will either face trial as adults or potentially have their cases handled in juvenile court, depending on various factors and legal decisions. If convicted, they could face life sentences. Their families will visit them in prison. They'll grow from teenagers to adults behind bars. They'll have decades to think about what they did and why they did it. Whether they'll ever feel genuine remorse, we don't know. Whether they'll ever be able to articulate a motive that makes any kind of sense, we don't know. Whether they'll take responsibility or blame others, we don't know. What we do know is this. Jaleeyah Tune was a real person with a real life and real dreams. She survived being born 3 months early. She made a home on Christmas Eve as a baby and became her family's Christmas miracle. She lived 13 years. She made TikToks and cheered and made people laugh. She had a sister who loved her enough to hold her in her final moments, to keep her blood on her hands because it felt like presents. She had a mother who described her as friendly, smart, bubbly, someone whose personality can't be replaced. She had a father who's grateful he got to spend her last days with her, even though he wishes he'd had a lifetime instead. She had family and friends who released balloons in her memory and said Merry Christmas because that was her day. That was her meaning. Christmas was when she came home, and Christmas is when she left. The suspects are also real people, real teenage boys from real families with real histories. Maybe they had trauma. Maybe they had absent parents or poverty or violence in their homes. Maybe they had mental health issues or learning disabilities or addiction problems. Maybe they were products of broken systems and failed safety nets. Or maybe they were just teenagers who made catastrophic choices because their brains weren't developed enough to understand consequences, and their peer group encouraged the worst versions of themselves. We don't know their full stories yet. We don't know what led them to that moment in those bushes with weapons and intent, but we know they're human. Flawed, damaged, dangerous humans who destroyed a child's life and their own lives in the process. And that's what makes this so hard to process. There are no monsters in this story. There are no cartoon villains. There are just people making terrible choices with devastating consequences. A mother allegedly unable or unwilling to control her teenage son. A father allegedly trying to impose discipline through force. A son caught between them, choosing the street over either option. 3 teenage boys deciding murder was an acceptable solution to whatever problem they thought they had. A 13-year-old girl walking home with her sister after getting food. A moment where all those paths intersected. A decision made. Shots fired. A life ended. Multiple lives destroyed. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. This case didn't require evil. It required ordinary human dysfunction. Family conflict, teenage rebellion, peer pressure, poor impulse control, access to weapons, insufficient intervention. Things that exist in thousands of communities across the country. Things that usually don't end in murder, but sometimes do. The difference between Goldsboro and every other town isn't that Goldsboro is worse. It's that on December 21st, in Goldsboro, all the wrong factors aligned at the wrong moment. And a 13-year-old girl paid the price. The father's public video, whatever you think of it, reveals one truth. Loving your child doesn't mean you can save them. He loved his son enough to go get him from a bad situation. Loved him enough to try to teach him a trade. Loved him enough to provide structure and boundaries. And his son ran away, chose the streets, chose the path that led to a murder charge. And now the father is left with grief and anger and the terrible knowledge that he saw this coming and couldn't stop it. He blames the mother. Maybe fairly, maybe unfairly. We can't judge that without knowing her side. But his blame is really about helplessness, about the desperate need to make this make sense, about the impossible question. If someone is responsible for my son destroying his life, who is it? It can't just be my son. He's a kid. He's got a mother. Someone should have stopped this. And so the mother becomes a target, because blaming her is easier than accepting that sometimes people you love make choices you can't control. But here's the thing. Even if the mother failed her son, even if she enabled his worst behavior, even if she knew about the weapon and the gang involvement and did nothing, she didn't pull the trigger. Her son did. And that distinction matters. Because at some point, we have to hold people accountable for their own actions, even when they're teenagers, even when they had bad parents, even when systems failed them. 3 boys plan a murder. 3 boys executed that plan. 3 boys are responsible for Jaleeyah's death. Not their parents, not society, not poverty or trauma, or any other contributing factor. They made the choice. They have to carry that. So where's the line? When does heartbreak become obsession? When does pain justify harm? When does a parent's failure become criminal? When does a teenager's bad choice become something they can never come back from? These are the questions this case forces us to ask. And they don't have clean answers. The line is blurry. It moves depending on circumstances. It's different for every person, every family, every situation. But there is a line. And these 3 boys crossed it. They crossed it when they decided murder was acceptable, when they made a plan, when they brought weapons, when they hid in bushes, when they jumped out, when they fired. Each of those moments was a choice. Each one was a line crossed. And by the time Jaleeyah was on the ground with her sister holding her, they'd crossed so many lines there was no way back. I want you to think about something. Think about the worst thing you've ever wanted to do to someone, the angriest you've ever been, the moment where you thought, even for a second, I could hurt this person. Most of us have had that thought. Most of us have felt rage or jealousy or pain so intense we imagine violence. But there's a canyon between imagining and doing, between feeling and acting, between thinking, I wish you were dead, and actually taking steps to make that happen. That canyon is where morality lives. That canyon is where civilization lives. It's the space between impulse and action where reason and empathy and fear of consequences talk us down from our worst selves. These 3 boys didn't stay in that canyon. They leaped across it, and a 13-year-old girl died because of it. Jaleeyah Tune, the Christmas miracle, murdered 4 days before Christmas by 3 teenagers who thought they had a reason. Whatever that reason was, it wasn't good enough. It will never be good enough, because there is no reason that justifies planning the murder of a child. There is no explanation that makes this acceptable. There is no context that erases what they did, and yet we still have to try to understand it, not to excuse it, not to minimize it, but to prevent it. Because somewhere tonight, there's another teenage boy feeding rage he should starve. There's another parent losing control of their child. There's another girl who'll be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And unless we understand how ordinary people make extraordinary, terrible choices, we can't stop it from happening again. This case stays with me. The waste of it, the preventability of it, the way everyone involved probably wishes they could go back and make different choices. Jaleeyah might have chosen not to walk home at that moment. Jashia will spend her life wishing she'd walked a different route. The suspects might wish they'd stayed in school, listened to their parents, walked away from the gang. Their parents might wish they'd done more, done less, done differently. Whitney Tune might wish she'd kept her daughters home that day. The community might wish they'd intervened sooner with at-risk youth. Everyone has a what if. Everyone has a moment they'd change if they could, but they can't. What's done is done. Jaleeyah is gone. 3 boys are facing life in prison. Multiple families are destroyed. And we're left with questions that don't have good answers and grief that doesn't have expiration dates. Christmas in Goldsboro will never be the same. Alpha Court will always be the place where Jaleeyah died. Jashia will always be the sister who held her in those final moments. Whitney will always be the mother planning a funeral instead of opening presents. The suspects' families will always be the families of boys who murdered a child. And the rest of us, we're left wondering where our lines are. When does pain become violence? When does anger become action? When does love for our children fail to be enough? When do we cross from being human with dark thoughts to being someone who acts on them? At what point do we become the cautionary tale instead of the ones learning from it? So I'm asking you, leave your honest answer below. Where's your line? What would it take for you to cross from feeling to doing? And what are you doing to make sure you never get close to that line? Because the difference between these 3 suspects and you isn't that you're a better person. It's that you haven't been tested the same way. Or maybe you have been tested and you chose differently. Either way, the choice matters. The line matters. And staying on the right side of it is something we all have to actively do every single day. This case moved me because it didn't have to happen. Because everyone involved was reachable at some point. Because 3 teenage boys became murderers when they could have become mechanics or students or anything else. Because a 13-year-old girl who survived being born 3 months early, who made it home on Christmas Eve as a miracle baby, who had her whole life ahead of her, died in her sister's arms on a Sunday afternoon in December. If this case moved you too, if you're thinking about it after this video ends, if you're going to look at your own children or your own choices or your own anger differently because of Jaleeyah's story, then hit like. Subscribe for cases that ask hard questions about human nature. Because these stories matter. Not for the entertainment value, not for the shock, but because somewhere in the details of how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary evil, there are lessons about how we might stop it, about how we might save the next Jaleeyah before 3 boys hide in bushes and end everything. Somewhere at night, someone's feeding jealousy, they should starve. Someone's enabling behavior, they should confront. Someone's walking away from structure they need. Someone's planning violence they should never commit. And the choice they make matters more than they know. Because 4 days from now, or 4 months from now, or 4 years from now, that choice might destroy lives in ways they can't imagine yet. Just like 3 boys in Goldsboro couldn't imagine that murdering a 13-year-old girl would destroy not just her life, but their own lives and their families' lives and a community's sense of safety. They probably thought they'd get away with it. They probably thought it was justified. They probably thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. And now everyone pays the price. Everyone except Jaleeyah. She's gone. Released like those balloons at the memorial. Loved, remembered, grieved, but gone. The Christmas miracle who deserved decades more Christmases. Who deserved to grow up and make more TikToks and graduate from 7th grade and fall in love and have her own children and become an adult with a full life. Who deserved to be anything other than a murder victim at 13. But 3 boys took that from her, and we'll never get it back. And that's what makes this unbearable. Not just that it happened, but that it didn't have to, that it was preventable, that somewhere along the way, better choices could have changed everything. And that's where I'll leave you, with the weight of preventable tragedy, with the question of where your line is, with the memory of a 13-year-old girl who was someone's Christmas miracle and is now someone's unbearable loss, with the reality that human nature has dark edges and we're all capable of crossing lines we think we never would, and with the hope, maybe naive, maybe necessary, that understanding how this happened might help us stop it from happening again. Because Jaleeyah Tune deserved better. Her family deserves better. And every child walking home on an ordinary December afternoon deserves to make it home safe. Rest in peace, Jaleeyah. You were loved. You are missed. And your story will stay with everyone who hears it, including me, including everyone watching this. That's all we can do now. Remember you, honor you, and try to make sure no other 13-year-old becomes a statistic like you did. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's what we have.